Hello, everybody. Can you hear me correctly? I am testing the mic. Can everybody hear me? Testing, testing, one, two, three. Testing, testing, one, two, three. Testing, testing, testing. Okay, so what we are going to talk about is the long term effects of the peace in Russia and whether that's going to actually control the situation in Ukraine or what it means for the economy of the world, specifically oil and resource prices, because a lot of people don't know that some of the things like steel and things essential for the US economy are predominantly produced in Russia, if not refined in Russia. While a lot does come out of Australia and is refined in China, all of the high strength material used to be refined in both Russia and Ukraine. Excellent, Tom. I'm glad to hear that it popped up on your front page. At least we're getting a little bit of visibility now. Is there a topic specifically you would like me to chat about in this while we wait for more people to join? I'm getting reports from on the ground that almost the entire route up the uh, the Wagner group has avoided conflict, and it was actually the Russian army who pushed and actually forced the conflicts that did occur. I really think that the US media was slow on the uptake on this. They typically jump a lot faster onto whether something is true or not. It was, I think, 6 hours between the video being released by Prigozhin and when the first front page news article showed up on any of the major news headlines. So surprisingly, I think that they were actually surprised by this and playing it pretty much on the level because it matched what I was hearing hearing from people on the ground in Russia and also what's being said on Twitter. What's really interesting is I think that it doesn't play into the narrative of the left very well. So the problem is that the left wants there to be a good guy, but Wagner is the furthest thing from good guys that exist. Wagner is an evil organization run by an evil man who committed a huge preponderance of the atrocities. So it's not somebody that we would want to win in that fight. This is literally Hitler versus Stalin in terms of Prigozhin versus Putin. Both of them are awful. I actually think Prigozhin is worse than Putin. Aren't troops heading to Moscow, but there are so much room for. Yeah, there are reports of conflict on the way to Moscow, and there are confirmed reports of troops on the outskirts of Moscow. So I find it hard to believe that they aren't moving in that direction because reports of where they are progressively move north slower than a driving speed, which means that they would be going through checkpoints. Their numbers have also been growing as they've been heading north towards Moscow. So the believability of reports that the troops were heading towards Moscow is actually pretty high. Now, with the recent reports that Lukashenko brokered a deal, I think that might just be a delaying action. I think that may just be bringing people to the negotiating table because neither Prigozhin nor Putin want to have a battle on the outskirts of Moscow. That would be a disaster for either one, no matter who ends up in control. So I think that having a fight in or around Moscow would be a lose lose situation, which is why Lukashenko brought his army to the edge of Moscow and now they're having negotiations. I don't think that means it's over. I think that just means they're coming to the negotiating table. And I think Putin's been forced to do that because of just how many people have thrown their lot in with Prigozhin. He started out with probably only 25,000 troops, and recent estimates are anywhere between 80 and 90,000 troops under his command by the time he reached Moscow, which is less than 24 hours, less than almost 12 hours after this whole thing started. So I think that the believability of what we're seeing in terms of where the troops are is fairly high. What isn't believable is all the videos of every single Russian convoy with Russian troops from pretty much over the entire past year. Most of those videos are just people looking for views and likes and clout. I think that very few of those are actually real, but the ones that are real are confirmable because there are a whole bunch of people who go out and confirm, geolocate these things and confirm that it is Prigozhin's troops moving on Moscow. One of the things that we can look for in those videos to help us know whether those are Wagner troops is whether they are moving with confidence, whether they're moving with certainty, whether they're moving with aggressive action towards the locals. Because remember, both Prigozhin and Putin believe they're fighting for the Russian people. Also, the Red Z is a dead giveaway. The regular Russian troops that invaded in Ukraine had the regular Z, and the Prigozhin troops had the Red Z. So that's a good indicator of who's who. Looks like we just lost some people, so I don't know who that is. Any other questions, Tom? But on your statement, yes, I agree. There is no good guy here. Um, but at the same time, we don't want either of them to be battling it out in the streets because, yeah, it is hard to understand. The fog of war is very heavy in this situation. It's very hard to understand what's going on. And despite the fact that both Prigozhin and Putin are both truly bad guys, we don't want combat in the streets because the regular Russian people are not necessarily the enemy here. Anybody who is rah nationalist, let's go crush the Ukrainians, they already joined the military a long time ago and participated in the invasion. And so most of the people are either on the fence or just want peace or just sick of it. Just like in the US, the Russian people suffer from war exhaustion when there is a war, and a lot of opinions have changed. But then again, a lot of the people who strongly disagreed with the war have already fled the country. And you look at the flights out right now, and it's pretty crazy. Like one of my wife's friends, she's trying to fly out of Moscow, and I'm like, that's not what you want to be doing right now. When the last thing you want to do when there are armies meeting outside of a city is get on an airplane flying out of that. And that just seems like the most dangerous thing that you can do, the worst possible decision in that situation. Personally, I think that they should bunker down. That would be a bug in situation, in my opinion, if there were enemy forces with demonstrated AA capabilities. Because remember, the Wagner group has downed multiple aircraft. We don't know if those are all just helicopters or helicopters and fighters, but we do know that they have shot down aircraft. So you don't want to be a civilian putting yourself in the air at that time. I'm actually shocked that they're still running flights out of Moscow, and haven't shut things down just because it's too dangerous. What I do know is that the Ukrainians don't appear to be moving forward. They don't appear to be making any strikes during this time. They seem to be letting it play out. I don't know if that's a strategically good or strategically bad thing, but one thing it does tell me is that this whole thing could potentially prove that the Russian war is not some staged event, because everybody's driven by their own local reasons, their own driving factors, and we far too often ascribe our motivations, our perspective onto the news in America, and we don't think about things. If a Russian's going to do something, he's not going to do it from an American perspective. He's going to do it from a Russian perspective. I don't think they would target it, but when you're in an active war zone and you see a flight coming out, all it takes is one trigger happy guy. Remember, they don't have the level of friend and foe recognition that we do. A lot of their weaponry is just independent operator decided. So, I mean, how did the Egyptians shoot down that airplane that was in friendly airspace, but somehow somebody identified it as an enemy craft and it got shot down when they were not involved in any war? And you go to put yourself in a situation like in Russia and you have a civilian plane flying around, that's a humongous risk. So if you're not already in the air, I wouldn't get in the air. And so hearing that people are flooding the airports trying to get out of the city, that just seems like the worst idea ever. I would flee north, east, and west, but I would not try to fly out of the city. That would be the last thing I would possibly consider doing. But now that they've stopped moving and that they've supposedly are coming to the negotiating table, it may make it a little safer to fly, but still, I mean, you get somebody who's just a little bit too jumpy and somebody's going to die. And that's just not a good situation. That's a horrifying possibility to die when you're not the target in a war where you didn't have to be running. Because remember, both Putin and Prigozhin don't want to destroy anything in Russia. They want to apply their idea of justice to the situation. They're not trying to they could be trying to conquer each other. We don't know. The fog of war is extremely high right now. But what we do know is that both of them have stated goals, and those goals are entirely consistent with Russian ideology and motivations. Prigozhin wants justice for an attack, and while a lot of people think that might be a false flag, I don't, because I've been watching the arguments between Prigozhin and the other general, and this sort of strike against his men is something that is in line with Russian mentality when it comes to generals and their fighters. That makes sense, but I don't know if civilian aircraft would have the wherewithal to do that, and it just seems like a colossal risk, especially when you're dealing with people with poor friend and foe recognition. Because if you're a dark, blacked out plane flying out of an airport, I mean, and you're a random recruit, odds are you could misidentify them and shoot them down. Yeah, but I don't know if it speaks as that. I don't think it's saying what we think it might be saying. Zelensky, his entire goal is twofold. He does want to kick the Russians out of Ukraine. He does actually want to restore Ukraine to its normal borders, but he also is big into self-aggrandizement and looking like the hero. And if he strikes at the Russian forces, while potentially one of them could be doing his job for him, he will look like he's engaging in needless bloodshed. So I find it entirely consistent with Zelensky's behavior as a person, just a self-interested person, for him to not do anything, for him to just stand by and let things happen. When you flew out of Baghdad and Kabul, was it on a military aircraft or a civilian aircraft when they blocked everything out? Civilian charter. So it was chartered by the military, though. So the military rules were partially applying to the civilian aircraft, I assume, and that's why they blacked everything out. And I wonder if they even had transponders or anything like that running. Uh, yeah, that makes sense. B 737. Since it's only a couple of us, it'd be nicer if this could have a two-way conversation rather than simply a one-way live stream. I think that's why the Twitter Spaces have been more popular for this sort of thing, because I personally don't like showing my face that much. Flights, yeah, flights to Dubai. Yeah, I don't think the Twitter live stream thing is really that developed yet. I started it and it didn't alert any of my Twitter followers. I actually tried doing it there first, but it didn't work. Nobody joined. I think I need to coordinate or schedule something. But these sort of events, like the peace that was declared between Putin and, well, we don't know if it's declared, but supposedly declared between Putin and Prigozhin, is sort of a spur of the moment thing, and it's hard to schedule things like a Twitter space. Yeah, yeah. At least they are showing some people, right? We did have a few people pop on. I don't know if those were just random people or some people that were subscribers or saw my Facebook post or something like that. But it really doesn't make being live worth being having my face shown unless we get more like 5 or 6 people on here. But that's something we probably should schedule in the future. Yeah, Facebook won't show anything. Facebook doesn't like to show anytime I go line or live or put a link to anything else. I'm wondering who the new person that just joined us. If you're new here, please introduce yourself. We're talking about the ramifications of the potential peace between between Putin and Prigozhin, and the fact that it looks like things are grinding to a halt because neither of them want to have a battle on the exterior of Moscow, because whoever wins this thing, it doesn't play out in their best interest to destroy the capital city. So I think it's very likely that that we're going to see things slow down now that the Wagner forces have reached the outskirts of Moscow. I don't think that they've actually made a deal. Yeah, I mean, I the problem is that Twitter's algorithm doesn't like to give me visibility that much either, and I still get far more interaction on Facebook. As soon as Twitter becomes a more hospitable place, I'll probably spend a lot more time on Twitter. But at the moment, it's not giving me any love, and so it doesn't get as much focus or time. Are you on Twitter mostly, or where did you see the post? Or did you just see it on YouTube here? So the new person who joined us, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? So we've been talking about the attack of Prigozhin on. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, it's been 20 minutes here, and we've covered some basic stuff. So I'd be more than happy to continue this conversation over text, but I am going to shut down the live stream for now. Talk to you later, Tom.